Hey everyone, so it's Hearth and welcome back to my channel. So on today's video we're going to be starting off a series that I'm going to be doing on different magical herbs. And today we're going to be talking all about the history, folklore and uses of the Mandrake. Now the history, traditions and folklore of the Mandrake root are really fascinating, and that's what's gone on to make this plant one of the most well-known plants around the world. But a lot of people believe that it is fiction. They've read or watched Harry Potter and they truly believe that the Mandrake root only exists within the fictional Harry Potter universe, when actually its application in the Harry Potter universe is one of the reasons why so many people still know that this plant exists, even if they don't necessarily realize that it's real. Now the Mandrake is a fascinating plant. Its history, folklore and magical traditions around the world are probably one of the most interesting of any plant that I've researched so far. And so today we're going to be talking all about the history, folklore and traditions of using Mandrake root in your magical practice and a little bit of information about how it was used medically. Now the Mandrake is a really fascinating plant, and a lot of people may well have walked past one within their lives without even realizing it. I am not a budding botanist myself. I have not got a green thumb in the slightest. I tried really hard. I'm not a green thumb kind of person. But from what I've read, it appears that the Mandrake naturally grows within Western and Southern Europe all the way across to the Middle East, though this does vary source to source. So I'm pretty certain that you can grow it in lots of different areas around the world, but this is mainly where it's found natively. Now the plant itself on the surface looks rather unsuspecting. It's noted as having cabbage-like leaves and belladonna-like flowers. Now I state this mainly because a lot of people don't realise that Mandrake is a member of the belladonna family, and that makes it exceptionally toxic. As you will see as we get further into this, this root be really toxic and is not so friendly. So if you are planning on working with this plant or any item that has been derived from the plant, please take exceptional care. So many people have gone wrong with this plant in the past and it has been absolutely terrible for them. So please make sure that you take care because it be dangerous if it's not used correctly. But the Mandrake isn't necessarily well known for its flowers or its leaves. Mandrake root is what a lot of people were really after. One of the few plants around the world that is considered to be humanoid in its nature. The root is often pulled out of the ground with arms, legs, a head and a body, making it a really creepy and also very fascinating plant to deal with. Now the Mandrake root has a place among history in many different cultures. It is described in the Bible as well as lots of other different texts from lots of different time periods. It's a plant that is documented really heavily because of its involvement within magical, religious and medical practice, and it's almost marked its place in history because of how dangerous and how truly interesting it was. It went on to become one of the most expensive plants to buy. It was so sought after that people even created fakes of these plants. And if a family managed to get hold of a Mandrake root, it was often considered so sacred and so significant that the root was passed down through families, with generation after generation getting hold of the same root and using it in the same ways. Now Mandrake is used religiously, magically and medically, but it's the medical part that we're going to start with. Mandrake was really commonly associated with healing of the human body. This was during a time period when modern medicine simply didn't exist, and many healers believed that if you were to gather and use a plant that was in the shape of what you wanted to heal, it would help heal it. So a lot of flowers that were shaped like hearts were used within healing heart conditions, even though there's no active ingredient within that plant to actually heal a heart condition. And so Mandrake, with roots that were shaped like humans, was considered to have exceptionally powerful healing properties, and so it became highly sought after. It was used a lot during magic and medicine combined, or simply by healers to assist in healing ailments of the human body. However, because it is a member of the belladonna family, the leaves, flowers, and especially the root are highly toxic and often led to terrible fates. Now, a little later on, the root was used to assist in putting patients to sleep during surgery. The problem was that it was very trial and error. They were never sure how much of the root to actually give the patient, and with different roots and different plants of different ages containing different amounts of the active ingredient that was toxic, there was a lot more error than success. And so if you were unfortunate enough to be a patient that was sedated using mandrake root, you were probably more likely to not wake up than you were to actually wake up. And so slowly over time, it was phased out because it is so hard to work with, especially for people who didn't necessarily know the correct concentration to actually give a patient. Now, many of you may well know the story of mandrake roots screaming as they are pulled out of the earth, and as they scream, they kill the person who is hearing them. Now, this actually came out of a very, very large misunderstanding when it comes to the plant itself. If you today were to pull a mandrake root out of the ground, it wouldn't scream at you and potentially kill you, unless it was a baby one. If it's just a baby one, it'll knock you out, according to the wonderful universe of Harry Potter. But that is not how it actually was in the real world. Instead, what would happen is that when people were harvesting these plants for medical and magical associations, they would often die as they were harvesting the plants. And so people would come upon an area where mandrake was being harvested, and they would find the people harvesting them had died right there. They were just there. And so it was believed that as the mandrake was pulled out of the ground, their scream would instantly kill the person doing the harvesting. And there was a lot of fear around this, and they did so much to try to avoid it. It got to the point where people were so certain that they would die when harvesting a mandrake root that they would actually employ animals to do it for them, the most common being that of dogs. They would tie a piece of cord or rope to the dog's tail and then to the mandrake, throw a treat, the dog would chase after the treat and would pull the mandrake out of the ground. It was believed that then the dog would take the brunt of the attack of the mandrake rather than the human, who could then go in and safely gather the plant. Now, the reality of mandrake screaming is that they didn't scream at all. What is more likely to have happened is that any open wounds that that person might have had on their hand when they were harvesting the mandrake may well have come in contact with some of the fluid out of the root of the plant. And because mandrake root is so dangerous, it is so toxic, any juice from the root or from the plant itself, any sap getting into wounds could well have caused death while they were being gathered. And especially if they're trying to gather a lot of mandrakes, it may well have built up over time, resulting in people seemingly dropping dead while harvesting mandrakes. But it has led to an age-long legend of mandrakes screaming as they are pulled out of the ground. Now, there was a lot of fear, a lot of association with mandrake, and this really caused the prices to rise. And especially within the magical community, mandrake roots were considered to be a highly prized item, mainly because they were shaped like a person. Now, the root itself can grow to be around 2 feet in length, though that really depends on the age and the species of the plant. Now, mandrake roots can come out of the ground shaped like a humanoid, and these were especially highly prized. If a mandrake root appeared to have limbs, sometimes even fingers and toes, they were exceptionally highly prized and were considered to be more valuable than the roots that didn't. And so, fueled by the desire for magical practitioners and healers, and even people who were simply curious, maybe fascinated by the story of the mandrake, wanted one for themselves. And so it got to a point where people began to alter mandrake roots to make them appear more humanoid than they actually were. Those that were naturally dug out of the ground looking like people were quite rare in comparison to the number of mandrake that was sold over the hundreds, thousands of years that they were exceptionally popular. So what people would do is, if they would find a mandrake root, you might dig it out of the ground, cut into the root to define 2 arms and either 1 leg or 2 legs and a head, and then they would rebury that root into the ground. And the root would naturally seal over those open wounds, and when it was dug up in another 2-3 years, it would look as though it had naturally come out of the ground in the shape of a human. And as demand grew higher and higher, these roots would even be faked. By the time they made it to the market, to the healer or to the magical practitioner, it may well be not a mandrake root at all. It became really popular for lots of other roots to be cut into the shape of a mandrake, and if you had never seen a mandrake root before, but had heard all of the stories, you would likely spend a small fortune buying a fake, with a lot of people choosing to fake mandrake root with bryony root. This was done with so many different roots. Any plant that created roots that were large enough in order to carve into the shape of a human, this was done with, and it was done so frequently that there are so many fakes floating around that people believe are true mandrake root, when actually they just aren't. And if you were just a standard everyday person, you probably didn't know the difference, and so many people got ripped out of money. So today, saffron is often faked. It's a very expensive plant. Supply does not necessarily always match up with demand, and so people fake saffron. Back then, people were carving roots into the shape of people and just pretending it was mandrake left, right, and center. It was everywhere, and during this time period it was very difficult for standard people to know the difference. Day-to-day people would often be given or purchase mandrake root in different forms to help assist them with the things they wanted to do in their mundane lives. It was commonly considered that mandrakes came in two forms, male and female, although now we do know that these two forms were actually simply different species, but it was believed that if the end of the root was joined, it was male, and if it was separated, it was female. And so you would often find people buying small mandrake root and placing it under their pillow to help them conceive a child. Men would often carry a female mandrake root in their pocket to help attract the opposite sex. And this is a very, very simplistic form of sympathetic magic, the idea that like attracts like. And everyday people were doing this. It was just commonplace that if you wanted a child and you weren't able to conceive, you would likely find a small mandrake root that was maybe shaped like a little baby, and you would put it under your pillow or in your bedroom because that is what you wanted to bring in. And this is very commonly done today. You'll still find practitioners doing this. When you want to attract something into your life, you often act like you already have it to an extent. So using language like I have a good job rather than I want a good job is another very simplistic form of this. Or if you would like positivity in your life, some people might set up altars and add items onto it that represent what they want in their life. And then by adding items that have the same energy as it, look like it, or seem like it, that energy will then be attracted into your life. And this was done by just day-to-day people that probably had no understanding of why they were doing it. They might have been told by the local wise person or witch, or maybe it was a family tradition that was passed down and they just continued doing it. It was just a standard part of day-to-day life to use small amounts of sympathetic magic, and people often just considered it normal. Now, a lot of magical practitioners, especially those that lived and worked on the land, may well have noticed the belladonna-like flowers on the mandrake plant, and so were made aware of its potential uses within magic. Now, some of you may well have heard of flying ointments. Now, this is a topic that I need to cover all on its own, but very briefly, flying ointment was an item that was, and in some areas still is, used to assist in flight, that being not physical flight, but astral, energetic, mental flight. It was often created with several toxic or hallucinogenic plants, which would then give the effect of the witch flying. Often this was used in journeying, travel work, astral projection, anything like that, and largely went on to give the idea of witches actually physically flying, when actually flying ointment was used to spiritually, astrally, energetically fly from the body. But belladonna was at one time very commonly used in flying ointment. And for some people that were a little in the know-how for plants and how they could be used, the root was often used in flying ointments instead of or as well as belladonna. Though please, if you are planning on using or making flying ointment today, please do take care. Do not use any of these highly, highly dangerous plants, because it is so easy for things to go wrong. You can still get flying ointment often from trained herbalists. They know what they're doing. They know the concentrations to add in. I wouldn't recommend just slapping some stuff together and hoping for the best, because as we have seen in the medical bit of this story, it didn't go so well for that many people. So keep that in mind. But mandrake root wasn't just used for its toxic properties. They're also used whole, and some of the most interesting stories come out of Germany. Going back to the medieval period, it has been documented that German people would use something called an alron. Now, excuse the terrible pronunciation of that, I will put it at the bottom of the screen. German languages in general were just never my forte. But this is a tradition that has gone on from the medieval period, possibly even earlier but undocumented, all the way up to the modern day, and people still do this in certain areas. It is believed that the mandrake root would assist in offering protection, and because they were so expensive and so hard to find, mandrake roots were prized, they were taken care of, they were passed down through families, and this was especially popular when using these items. The root was considered to be almost a living being, and for the root to offer the house and the people within it protection, it in itself had to be taken care of. The root was often wrapped in silk and kept in a safe box in a safe location to assist in offering the household protection. 4 times a year, the mandrake root was taken out of its safe location and it was washed in strong alcohol, usually whiskey or brandy, before being dried, wrapped back up in the silk, and then put back in the box. This liquid that was left behind, the washing water, was then sprinkled around the property and inside the property to assist in bringing protection into the lives of the people that lived there. Now, this tradition is very commonly found even today in loads of different areas around the world. Items are considered to be alive, to be a living spirit, and so by treating them with respect, they would get something back as a reward. Now today, a lot of people will work with puppets or dolls in a similar way. Often, once you've created a puppet, you need to take care of it as though it is a living being, almost as though it is a baby. You need to be feeding it regularly with energy, you need to be making sure that it's clean of any negativity. You then often wrap it up in black silk, keep it in a shoebox, and then keep it somewhere safe. So this tradition is used in lots of different ways, just with lots of different cultures and with lots of different items. And in this case, it's using a mandrake root. Though I will say, if you plan on doing this yourself by getting hold of a mandrake root, please take great care. As I've mentioned several times, the root itself is one of the most toxic parts of the plant, and by washing the root in alcohol, it may well be taking in some of these toxic ingredients, and then by sprinkling it around your home, you might ultimately put pets at risk if you do have animals that might try to lick up the alcohol. This, though, may well have been one of the reasons why the root was considered to be highly protective, because if you're sprinkling it around your property, any animals that would maybe come in and damage property or eat food may well be poisoned by the mandrake root liquid. Just throwing that out there, it is a possibility, you never know. Now, not only were the mandrake roots kept for protection, treated like a part of the family, passed down through generations, they were also considered to be familiars, and a lot of people still do this to this day. Now, there's 2 different routes, pun not intended this time, that people can take when it comes to using a mandrake as a familiar. For some people, the root itself has a living essence to it, and when worked with, when connected to, can then agree to a familial spirit contract that then allows the familiar to actually be the essence of the mandrake root. And so people would work with them in their spiritual practice, and the mandrake would do the spiritual work while the human will do the energetic and the physical work. The other route, I'm never going to get tired of using that, is to instead use the mandrake root as a vessel. These are often referred to as spirit houses. They are used today when it comes to working with familiars as having a physical location to work with them. So the familial spirit is a spiritual being that works spiritually while we work physically. And often they will need a home, a place to rest. And people would use mandrake roots to be this spirit vessel, where they may be given offerings, they may be taken care of, washed, fed, and the like, in order to assist in helping spiritually. Now, the use of mandrake roots was actually even documented during the witch trials as a way of stating whether someone was or wasn't a witch. Not only was it black cats and toads, it was also mandrake roots. Seems odd now, really, doesn't it? But honestly, looking back at the witch trials, it was an odd and very, very dangerous time. It is documented in different areas of Europe that there were several people who were actually accused of witchcraft and some even sent to trial because they had mandrake root in their home, which just blows my mind considering that at this point in time, mandrake was exceptionally popular and so many people wanted it either as a curiosity item or because of its medical and magical properties. But, of course, as we have seen throughout the rest of the witchcraft trials, there were a lot of things that people were accused of being witches for that didn't necessarily have anything to do with witchcraft. So, honestly, when it comes to the witch trials, not much surprises me anymore. Even people being accused of having a literal root in their house, just like a tuber, a plant, like a potato. It really confuses me. It really blows my mind. I can never wrap my head around the thought process of the witch trials, and I have to keep reminding myself that it was a period of hysteria, especially religious hysteria, so I can kind of understand. Anyway, back on topic. It is even believed that Joan of Arc, like the Joan of Arc, was accused of having a familial spirit in the form of a mandrake root. That is how widespread mandrake roots were. So many people had them, whether you were rich or whether you were poor. Everyone wanted a little piece of the mandrake root action. But as we've seen, it didn't necessarily go great for a lot of people. Between the surgeries and the accusations of witchcraft, it kind of all didn't end well. But the legends and the stories of the mandrake still live on today. As we've seen, Harry Potter took the idea of the mandrake root and added it into one of the most well-known stories in the world. Mandrake is such a popular story, most people will have at least heard of the plant, even if they don't know it's real. But people still use it today. The use of an Alron is still present today. People, especially within Germany, do still use them in their magical practice. And people do still use mandrake root or forms of the mandrake root within their own magical traditions right now. There are people growing them, there are people using them. One of the most well-known magical practitioners to have grown mandrake root was Raven Grimassi. Now, unfortunately, Raven Grimassi is no longer with us, but it is well documented, and I believe he documented it a lot himself about the growing of mandrake roots because he really was so fascinated with the history and the tradition of these plants. Today, a lot of people will use mandrake roots as a form of poppet. Now, I have done a full video on poppets, I will link it up here, but essentially a poppet is a magical item that is used to represent a person or an animal. Often they take the form of that animal, so people will often make them out of clay, wax, fabric. Sometimes people will also make poppets for their pets, often for protection and healing, so you'll have people that make poppets in the shape of cats or dogs or guinea pigs or hamsters, and it's all kind of really cute, isn't it? I'd love a little poppet of a cat, that would be adorable. But people do still use them today, and they will also use mandrake root for this purpose. Not necessarily to stuff with items, but instead using it as a physical representation of the person. The idea being that once you link the poppet to a person, the energy work that you put into the poppet will then manifest over into the life of the person the poppet is connected to. And so you'll often find people take great care of poppets. They will gather them together in silk cloths and they will keep them in boxes to keep them safe. They will treat them as a living, breathing item, a living object within their magical practice that they need to take care of and that they need to keep safe. And then when necessary, they will bring it out and they will feed it with their energy to help continue that working on. And people will still do that today with mandrake root, although a lot of places won't sell mandrake root because it is so dangerous. And so a lot of the people that do use mandrake roots as poppets are the people that do have them handed down through their family, because especially in England and over in North America, a lot of places won't sell mandrake roots or even the seeds because they are so dangerous if used incorrectly. Now, alongside the use of them as poppets, people today will still use mandrake root as a spirit vessel. Now, you can do this, as mentioned, in one of two ways. Either you can connect with the energy and the spirit of the plant and then ask if they are willing to enter into a familial contract, or you can use the mandrake root as a vessel for that familial spirit so that it has somewhere to reside in the physical plane. Now, you don't just have to do this with mandrakes, it's not limited to that. People will create their own spirit vessels, sometimes they're objects and items, sometimes people even use cuddly toys and dolls. It really depends on your magical practice, but people do today still use mandrake root for this, although it is a little more uncommon, mainly just because they're so hard to find. Now today, most practitioners don't want a full mandrake root, or they might want a full mandrake root but might not be able to get hold of it. And so instead they will opt for having just small pieces of mandrake to add into spell work and ritual. They can be used in bag spells, in jars, in bottles, in charms. They can be used in so many different ways for quite a few different magical properties. The mandrake root is associated with healing and fertility. It's also associated with love, prosperity, and protection. And we can see where all of these ideas and associations have come from because of the history of the plant. Often added into pockets to attract love, and pillows for fertility, used in the house as alrons, as protection. They were used in so many different ways throughout history, and we can see all of this in the modern associations. Now, the plant does have other associations too, and for some people it is associated with different deities, different genders, and different elements. Now, for those of you that are interested, it is often assigned the masculine gender. However, this really depends on the type of root and the type of belief that you have. A lot of people throughout history did believe that different roots had different gender associations. If they were together, it was a man. If they were apart, it was a woman. So it really depends on your kind of belief system, whether or not you consider it to be all masculine or whether you consider some to be masculine and some to be feminine. That's all up to you to decide. It's associated with the planet Saturn, as well as several different deities, including Circe, Hecate, Hathor, Diana, and the god Saturn. So there's lots of things that you can use it for. But honestly, for me anyway, I find the folklore and traditions of the mandrake root to be the most fascinating part of it all. The ups and downs of this root throughout history have been well documented, and it's seen in many sacred texts, including the Bible, which is quite impressive. I don't often mention the Bible on my channel, and I personally am not Christian, so I don't often feel the need to. But the fact that a plant associated so closely with magic and witchcraft found its way into the Bible and is documented as being used to assist with fertility is unbelievable to me. It's really interesting. It's been used for poisons, it's been used for healing, it's been used for flying ointments, as well as dolls and familiars, finally making its way into the witch trials, and then ultimately fell out of favour with the general public, especially when Christianity began to really take over from the folk traditions of the land. You would find less and less people wanting to get hold of mandrake root, instead opting for prayer, religion, and doctors rather than the traditional healings and the traditional techniques of the folk healers and the witches. And so during the witch trial period, you often see people being scared to have mandrake root. They would often get rid of their mandrake root because they were so fearful of being accused of being witches. And then generally, people just weren't after them anymore. So after all of that time throughout history of being so popular that people were faking the roots and giving people other things, ultimately people largely believe that mandrakes aren't real. It's a name that brings up visions of Harry Potter and screaming roots being pulled out of the ground, when in reality it is a very poisonous plant with some fascinating history. The idea that people would often leave animals to pull up the roots because they were so scared of them screaming is just a fantastic story, and it doesn't surprise me that it ended up in fantasy works like Harry Potter, because it's a story that deserves to live on. And so I hope that you got something out of this video. I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit about mandrake root. If you did, feel free to give it a like. It really, really means so much to me. Are there any other plants that you would like to know the folklore and traditions of? If so, feel free to let me know down in the comment section. I am going to put some links to the references that I used for this video down in the description box so that you can learn a little bit more. I didn't add it all in, mainly because it's just a lot. There's a lot. So I will add some more resources down in the description box if you do want to find out more. If you do have any questions, comments, concerns, video ideas, feel free to put them down in the comment section. We do have a Discord server. The link is down in the description box. And lastly, a massive shout out to all of my Patreon supporters. You guys are amazing, and your names will be on the end screen in just a moment. So I hope you guys are all staying safe. I hope you have a marvelous magical day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!